of everything.
Say this whole thing about the left, right?
Oh no!
And this is a big topic, the left. Okay? There's a lot of assertions and a lot of accusations when it comes to the left.
Right.
What in particular do you think African Americans don't know that you know, or anyone else who's criticizing the left, or kind of like questions, being skeptical about leftist kind of like narratives? What do you think they don't know about the Republican Party and the Democratic Party that they should know?
Well, first of all, they should know that the KKK was influenced by the Democrats.
Was it?
Yep.
Can you tell me how? Because from what I know,
I don't have a photographic knowledge of that, but
I have a bit of thing.
All right,
I mean,
Republicans
the reason
freed the slaves.
So they go?
The Republicans freed the slaves.
Where?
The first black congressman was a Republican as well. The first black people were in the Republican Party. The government.
But the first people to make, the legalization of gay marriage in the UK were Tories. Right, and the Tories were instrumental in being homophobic within the 80s.
That's only because of
so that doesn't necessarily, but that doesn't necessarily negate the fact that, it doesn't dictate the fact that just because you allow, or you were in the time to allow a certain policy to pass, that you were one of the pushers and one of the forefathers of the idea and the liberty behind freeing slaves in particular. I'll give you an example of gentleman was saying the KKK arose from the Democratic Party. I find that suspicious because we know, and I know where the whole Civil War and the arguments between abolition and non-abolition came from, and I know that in particular southern states, and red southern states in particular, were employing certain people, and they were called border ruffians, so to speak, right? And these were the people who would go out and stop abolitionists from coming into a certain state so that they would vote a certain way, so that the land occupied at the time that they were trying to get for a railway, long discussion, would vote in the favor of keeping slaves. So when people talk about the South and the fact that the South has been instrumental in trying to keep slavery, it's actually based on facts, because territories that were handled by the North, right, were very instrumental in trying to get rid of the thing of slavery. Economically, not for moral. Let me not even give them that thing. But the South were very stubborn in keeping the freedom to do so, and they wanted to extend it into territories that weren't theirs. So the idea that
I think nobody's contesting that. It was just that the thing is, you talked about the Democrats being like pro free slaves. Well, when I think it's a historical fact that the Republicans freed the slaves, and there was a massive switch in the South of voting in the last century. People used to vote Democrat en masse, and then they switched to voting Republican. The Republican Party was the ones that actually fought the war to defeat the South, that wanted to keep the slaves.
Even if it wasn't for moral reasons.
Even if there were other reasons, and the Republicans have. I think the main issue is with the Republicans nowadays that people have with them is that they're a mix of traditionalist, religious people, conservatives, and people kind of associate that with angry white conservative men that don't like people in their yard. But I don't think that's necessarily fair completely, because what conservatives usually say, from what I've seen, is just be competent and you're welcome into the country and the party.
Absolutely.
Add to the country, and you're a black man and you're working hard and you're doing your thing.
Oh, but that's the thing. The lefty mindset often comes from a broken home or a single parent household.
Most lefties tend to be from middle class families.
Yeah, but potentially they still have a very, their family would probably not be very religious, and therefore not having a very strong
maybe
foundation.
A rebellious thing, or?
Some of them probably do come from that situation.
But then that might lead to a little bit more out of the box thinking, as opposed to, so that's why that might seem a little bit unstable in comparison to someone who is within a box of a certain structure that's already been established. So it seems more stable to you because that's the language that you know. But someone speaking a different language because they're thinking outside the box may seem radical to you. Mm-hmm. So when I just wanted to go on your point. Now I agree with you about the Republicans, but again, another thing that people don't realize is that the reason the Republican Party exists is because there were certain people who were in the Democratic Party that fought, right, that believed that the Democratic Party were not pushing fast enough to get rid of slave ownership.
I don't think that's right.
That's according to the Tennessee.
I don't think that's. I think the Republican Party is older than the Democratic Party, much older. I think it is.
The Republican Party is the Democrat. Are you talking about the Republican of America's party?
Yeah.
That's the Democrat now. So that's the Democrat now.
They never switched. They never switched.
They just changed names.
Well, they didn't say like you. They never said you're going to be called Republicans and we're going to be called Democrats now. Let's switch names. That didn't happen.
I can confirm it for you.
There was a switch maybe in policy or who voted for who, but parties never changed.
I can confirm it for you. So
Yeah, sure.
originally, when the Americans took away, separated from the British, right? They called themselves a republic. The republic is because it's represented by the populace, so republic, right?
Yeah.
It then later on became the Republic Democratic Party, and this is now how we have the Democratic Party.
Right.
During that switch, and that switch in particular, there was a certain group of Democratic Republicans or Republicans at the time who felt that they were going away from the original message of being Republicans or being free men from the British establishment, right? Which included having no slaves. So they felt like it wasn't going fast enough. So they split off from the party. They left the party and created what we now know as the Republican Party, right? So the idea that the Democratic Republic wasn't kind of like instrumental or kind of like, cooperative in the abolition of slavery. It's one of those things where we have to look at the times, we have to look at the narrative at the time, and we have to look at, again, the political kind of like inheritance that the parties had at the time. So the atmosphere that they had, the social narrative at the time, and how they were going to implement these certain rules, because every time they implemented rules that would, again, decrease the amount of inequalities between different races, there was always a backlash. And they'd have to reduce that backlash from the white Americans. You can see this again with when the Chinese came over from China to America to mine the gold in the factories, and loads and loads of them came along. When that gold went and the mines were all kind of like emptied, that's when we started to see more racial kind of aggravated assaults towards the Chinese, more kind of racial tensions between the whites and the Chinese had to depart because of all of that hostility. So the idea that they were kind of like withholding this kind of like the abolition of slavery doesn't go by the historical narrative that is there. I agree with you in the sense that there is an element that isn't talked about, the fact that they do come, and a lot of the Republicans do come from that state of mind where it's like, no, we're free Americans, that's what we based our society on, that's what we want. No one does talk about that, but we should talk about now where the party is at. And ultimately, on both sides, we have to acknowledge that there are racists on the Democratic Republic side, but there's racists on the Republican side as well. Do you not think there's racist lefties? There is racist lefties. There's racist righties. And I think
African Americans, by their own admission, are the most racist in America. Would you say?
I don't have any figures on that. Can you elaborate?
Well, essentially,
talk about Chris Rock.
Well, anyway, think about it.
No, I've never been exposed to that.
A white comedian is very limited to what he can get away with. Even Jews. But a black woman comedian is limitless what she can say.
I don't think that's true.
You can't say everything, right? Not everything.
Yeah, but it's more accepting than any other person. You know?
I mean, the thing is, I think when we talk about what you can and you can't say and stuff like that, and we kind of trump that to the level of privilege someone has, it's a bit of a ridiculous kind of like thing to go on.
I know it's a subjective thing.
No, I'll address it. I'm not going to like bat it off as it's ridiculous because that's what a lot of leftists do. I will address it, but I do want to ground the conversation that the fact when we talk about privilege, we're talking about the ability to generate revenue, the ability to generate resources, the ability to make money. That's where the whole privilege argument does come into, and the freedom to do that and the equality to do that. But when we're talking about, in particular, the narrative of not being able to say certain things like the N-word or the K-word with Jews, etc. Right?
Even I'm not allowed to say crack anymore. You know?
That's not just. But the thing is, that's not just isolated. That's not just isolated to blacks, Jews, and non-whites. Whites also had labels that you couldn't say, otherwise you'd get punched in the face. I'll give you an example. Hillbilly was apparently one word that a hillbilly could say to another hillbilly in a term of endearment and respect, and taking back the term hillbilly. But if someone from another society, including the white society, if it was an upper society, said hillbilly, right? It was a derogatory term, and you'd get a punch in the face for that.
Oh yeah, the class system.
Absolutely.
Always had
so
that.
The idea that it's, non-whites against whites. It's, you know, not being able to say certain things. You know, that goes both ways. Like,
I acknowledge that, but it's like, for example,
Guys, I gotta go. Thank
Have
you
a
so
good one,
much,
man.
man. It was good.
You too. I'll see you around, man.
I don't know what it's called, but essentially you would fight with your brother,
Yeah.
then your cousins come in, then you team up with your brother, and then you fight with your cousins.
Yeah.
The neighborhood children come in, so you team up with your brothers and then your cousins, and you know it all kind of like keeps expanding.
But I think this is one of my biggest gripes as a left person who leans on the left. For me as a leftist, I look at the throne, or I look at the fight, that situation that you just finished, and I see why are people fighting. Some leftists will see, oh, I just don't like the person who's winning. That's the difference. Some leftists will see that there's the throne, I hate the throne completely. So when we talk about capitalism versus communism, I despise the state of capitalism that we're in now, right? But some lefties don't despise capitalism. They despise who is on top of capitalism. So you'll always see them talking about the white man this, the white man that, the white man this. But then when you ask them, if you were in power and you were to emulate the same kind of atrocities that this person had like emulated on your community, would that be okay? They will say yes. And for me, that's a disconnect. Because you're saying that you're okay as long as it's someone else doing it. That doesn't. There's nothing consistent about that. So when you say the whole kind of like,
Well, it's more like they feel like the people on top did not earn it, right?
well, there's an argument for that. Yeah, but go on.
Oh well. Well, I kind of like don't believe we are living in a capitalistic system.
Not fully. Not fully.
Well, could you say that it's almost like a perverted socialist system?
In the UK, definitely.
But also in America, you could say. Because
Maybe, but not as much. Where the military is concerned, yeah, they're very socialist about their military. But when it comes to human rights, not so much.
But do you think a truly capitalistic, moralistic capitalist system where only government is only in charge of police, military, and jury, and then the rest is free market? Do you think that could be a way to bring the left and the right to a cooperative understanding?
The only reason I don't think so is because I feel like one of the biggest limitations of being right-wing is the fact that your argument, especially for a lot of, no offense, a lot of white, right, not that you're a thing, but a lot of white right-wingers, is that they're ultimately defeated by their own narrative and they don't realize this. So the reason in particular that blacks made supposedly really good slaves is because of the physicality. So when we're talking about the ability to work for much less, and the ability to endure longer hours and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
There was a reason
Especially under the sun.
Yeah, there was a reason certain races were picked. So when you put that argument forward for a more, like economically capitalist society where we blank everything out, right? We take away race, we take away all of the kind of like, and we limit it down to literally workers. The value that workers produce, the values that workers can do, X, Y, and Z, blah, blah, blah. I think that's a losing battle, and that's where you start to see more nationalism arise. Because even in America, when they took away the whole kind of like, when they, was it before or after? When they introduced the whole minimum wage, blacks lost out. Because originally blacks would work for less, and they'd work more for less.
But they could
well.
also progress.
So yeah, absolute. But with minimum wage, it meant that
you need your starting points, regardless of its
no, absolute. But with minimum wage, it meant that black and white started on an equal playing field, which meant that that's where that tribal kind of like likeism comes in, where employers are a lot more likely to employ people of their own rather than the people of the thing. But when it came to the merit of production, blacks were being employed, and the unemployment rate was literally par for par. So I say, for me personally, when people talk about capitalism and they talk about this ideal of capitalism, this free market movement everywhere, blah blah blah, I ultimately think that it would lead to massive white civil unrest, because a lot of people would be out of job, a lot of people would be competing quite heavily with people of other races, and we've seen quite heavily.
So you do believe in welfare system?
Say that again?
Do you believe in like a universal basic income?
I do believe in a universal kind of like safeguard, governmentally applied, that does look out for people who may not necessarily have the same
But people
kind of...
under that don't think their mindset is going to keep swarming very aggressive or children who don't have a father figure.
But we don't have an example of that because the majority, and I'll give you an example, the majority of people who are on benefits in the UK are white British people. It's 90, it's
because
90.
they're most of the population, but also a lot of them have resorted to being part of the welfare because they lost their mining jobs.
They're also overrepresented in benefits as well. They're 92% as opposed to 86% of the population.
Oh, yeah.
So that's my biggest problem. Like when it comes to that, I think the biggest problem is that you don't, again, when we look at the modules that we've got in place now, right, and we're talking about benefits, right, yes, it's good to look out for someone and make sure that they don't starve and die. But at the same time, you don't want to get into a situation where you're just constantly paying this person's life out. These things can be improved and we can work on, but the thing is they haven't been improved on. People are just given food stamps, people are just given a certain basic allowance, no kind of initiative, no kind of schemes, no kind of, education classes.
Well, there's no attempt. In fact, it's they've bottled their mindset into thinking I can't make over this amount because if I make over this amount, then I won't get my welfare or my whatever.
That's a very small section of people, though. Like, don't get me wrong. We're being very derogatory to, like, especially out of London Brits here, because bear in mind the prosperity of the UK is pretty much based in London and then dispersed outwards, right?
Oh, yeah.
I'm never going to compare my possible opportunities to someone out of London, and I'm never going to compare my education level to someone out of London as well, because it's not a fair comparison. It's like the ability for them to kind of generate revenue is not as great as I have, even as a black male in London, the centre of economic prosperity in the UK. So when we talk about this whole kind of like generation of people who have been left on the dole, as they do call it, I do think there has to be a sympathy there, regardless of skin colour, regardless of class, regardless of race.
But before that, we had charities through the church.
Did we? Okay, tell me about that.
I think it went like this. The nobility had role to play where they would donate their vast wealth to the churches. The churches were what were giving charity to people who got downtrodden or needed a place to stay and giving food to the homeless and whatnot. So it was a system that we've always had, essentially, where we take care of the downtrodden to rear them up to get back on foot. But what we have now is basically we just want the globalists or the elites want to make as much people as possible as just these consumer zombies, where they're giving a small allowance and that money isn't being saved. They hate savers.
Of course.
You know, they just want them to keep spending it back into the system because they want the corporations to make the money. They don't want middle class people to make money. They don't want working class people to make money. They just want them to be bees. As just bees, you know.
But just on a quick one.
Yeah.
This is something that the left is fundamentally so opposed to. So why? I'm just from a leftist point of view. Why do we get such a stick?
They're supporting it, even though they pretend or trick themselves into thinking that.
Well, this is one of the biggest problems. Again, like even in Marx's manifesto, or even like some of the like leftist writings, they actually. I'll give you an example. Feminism in particular, right, and women's issues. Yes, it's classed as a left-leaning argument, but even leftists have recognized and have always recognized that it's not a substitution for what was originally a backlash against corporations and the the hegemony of corporations. The idea of being a leftist is making sure that corporations never get to a point where they now, right, dictate what the masses desire, kind of thing. Not giving them political power or enough political power to the point where our voices don't mean anything in the political sphere. So where have we got to this point where all of these like nuisance outlets such as BuzzFeed, what's another one? BuzzFeed, Jezebel, Lacey Green, all of these people are classed as leftists when none of anything that they have to do revolves around classic leftist themes.
Again, I would say that it kind of started in the French Revolution and then expanded, especially after the.
But the French
Second
Revolution
World War.
was mainly against like monarchies, aristocracies who again
Exactly.
would demand a whole ton of like payment and taxes from the from the people.
So the left is fundamentally against monarchy, you say?
Say that again?
The left is against monarchy in the sense that they want things to be a republic, you know.
The left is against a society that doesn't represent the masses. That is the main thing. And the problem
their
is,
interpretation of things.
problem is the monarchy and the aristocracy do not represent the masses. None of their, again, I think there was a famous line by what's his name, Immortal Technique, really good rapper, and he was like how they vote for us to go to war instantly, but none of their kids serve in the infantry, and it's a true statement. It's the fact that when we go to war, it's on the demands and on the investments of people who are in these big corporations, but it's our kids as cannon fodder. While their kids get to inherit a company. So this again comes back to what you were saying about when leftists talk about certain people that are in positions of power that haven't earned it. You know, we talk about Churchill as if he's a great hero and great blah blah when we talk about World War II, but we rarely
we can acknowledge Churchill had flaws,
we can, no, absolutely, we can. But why do we not acknowledge the soldiers? Why do we not acknowledge the names of the soldiers?
Why do we have silence why do we have like a moment of silence
you think that's a fair representation in comparison to being on the £5 bill, having movies made about you, having books written about you, and having you as a historical staple for the end of time? That's a fair representation. That's again an example of how aristocracy becomes the supposed face of the working class. They're not the face of the working class.
I think regardless, we're just inevitably going to have hierarchy and situation where people on top didn't earn it, they were born into it. But I think we would acknowledge that if we became these wealthy billionaires and we had children, we want our wealth to be.
But you understand that's not how society progresses. Like even in ancient Egypt, and I was reading this a week ago, just because I needed to brush up on my actual ancient Egyptian kind of knowledge. Ancient Egypt kind of prospered after the kind of like dynasty where they kind of idolized and deitized the pharaohs. When it came into prominence, there was a leader. He claimed himself as pharaoh. Godly ordained, etc. Blah blah blah. It was only after the aristocracy, right? So the lower sect before the actual pharaoh, the lower sect. It was only after.
I see free. Can you come here? Because
it was only after the aristocracy then kind of like ousted the pharaoh class and made it more of a religious staple as opposed to actual like a section of power, or an entity of power, right? That ancient Egyptian society started to rise from what it was. So it's when you start to, again, allocate the power and distribute the power quite fairly that you see more kind of like prosperity amongst the people instead of centralizing it in one place.
No, because the role of the pharaoh, the king, is to play the role, whether it's like the seasons of need to be fertile or whatever.
But that was
and if they fuck up, they're accountable to the people, and the people can get rid of them.
But that's the thing. That was only for one generation. Historically, that was only for one generation. After that, the pharaohs played maybe a proxy deity, and it was the aristocracy that would run Egypt.
Okay, but again, they're not the aristocracy isn't really in the way you said it, accountable in the same way.
No, I understand, but what I'm trying to say is it's that diminishing from one central figure of power, right? Mm-hmm. One central drive of the means of production to a more representative number, right? That allowed Egypt to thrive. So the idea of being a leftist is the idea that surely if you then present people with more power to kind of represent themselves and have their energy, replicated in your society, then you would have a more prosperous society. But that's one example.
But would you say that change happened between the old Egypt before Akhenaten, where there seemed to be a multiple of temple dedicated to different deities, and then you seem to have Akhenaten. I don't know if I've got this right.
No, that's cool.
Akhenaten then kind of pulled all those deities into one.
Okay, yeah.
And then from what I'm hearing from what you're saying is that after Akhenaten, they tried to return to old system, but they returned to it in a different way, where there were groups of elites rather than temples. Is that what you're saying?
That's
it shrank like this and then opened up again.
That's the one.
All right,
So
okay.
almost similar. Like I think just to kind of paint it in a more kind of like simplistic term, there was the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt by Akhenaten. And after that, they had the deity, which was the pharaoh, right? People often see pharaohs as kings or whatever, but they put pharaoh as a deity. That's what the pharaoh class is, or the pharaonic thing. Because even when you had the pharaoh, you had the kings of different kingdoms of Egypt, right? So there was the pharaoh, and then there was the kings, right?
Yes,
the kings. Yeah. So the kings themselves organized an ousting of the pharaoh to kind of give him less political kind of power, and to give them more of a representative political power. And this is when you started to see Egypt kind of this is when you started to see Egypt kind of like prosper from just being kind of like sand villages and sand tribes to actual architecture, medicine, maths, science, all of this kind of stuff.
Okay.
This is where it all kind of like nurtured around. So what I'm trying to say to Jamie it was after.
Right, okay. Right.
What I'm trying to say to Jamie in particular is that that's a representation of when the power is distributed a little bit more fairly amongst people, that you see more prosperity.
Okay.
Instead of it being centralized.
I know, but I feel I like the idea that the military is called the Royal Army, or the Royal Navy, or the police are got a appointed figure that they
keep.
They have an oath to that they swear to the Queen.
Okay.
So the mindset's like it's like the father figure or the mother figure.
Yeah.
And I think the masses need to have a very strong, really identifiable symbol that keeps them grounded and stable, and it's a reference to the history of like all the kings of England, and how our society has moulded by the cooperation of both the people and the king, and how we came with English common law and the Magna Carta, and other things like Bill of Rights and free speech.
But the only thing is, that's not what made Britain great that we know Britain now. Right? We know that the Normans came, we know that the Angles came, we know that they introduced certain theologies and certain methodologies, roads, laboratories, certain basic human kind of concepts that bettered the society of Britain as we now know it. I mean, I often look at architecture as a kind of an example of the potential of certain tribes, and certain empires, and certain cultures back when. And when I ask people, like, what architecture does Britain hold? Right, the oldest architecture that we have, or supposedly temple architecture, is Stonehenge. Now, Stonehenge is more of a mystery than it is a feat of architectural brilliance, right? The idea that you can get two stones like this, and then get one on top, right? With no idea of a pulley system or a crane, right? That's a mystery. That's ridiculous. But in terms of comparing that to the Aztec pyramids or the pyramids of Giza, or the mounds in Ireland as well, 3,500 years old, right? This is what's the word? Premeditated architecture, right? You don't have that. So it's funny because when I look back at what kind of like
we are pretty north in where it would have probably been still in an ice age. So.
No, I absolutely agree. Again, this is not this is not a nod to superiority, or this is not a nod to
I suspect because we having more discoveries of civilization going back tens of thousands of years, so
we're still to find more probably.
But do you feel like there was a almost unifying empire or religion or mindset that regardless if you're Aztec or Egyptian or Druid, you all got your beliefs from the same teacher?
Yeah, sex.
No, but I suspect it's Rodin as a patron, because even the Mayans and Aztecs say that there was a teacher from the east that had complexions that were Caucasian, and we even have statues of people who have beards, even though the Incas didn't have beards. So it's interesting to see the connections, and also possibly We also have like spices that are in places that wouldn't make sense, like vanilla. We found it in a tomb in Syria 1,000 years ago, but vanilla is native to Mexico. So how does that happen?
Absolutely. No. You're absolutely right. But just back on the original point of architecture, when I was originally looking back to find, because again, when we're talking about Britons, we're talking about a certain tribe that came from Central Europe and then landed. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong.
Indo-Europeans, you mean?
Yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong. Was it not the tribe which is now Ireland, which were here first, and then were then pushed on to Ireland by what we know to Britain?
There was what do you call it? The first like European farmers, which were probably kind of darkish skin and blue eyes. And whatever, but the Indo-Europeans, they're very strange phenomenally, especially like in the fact that they developed this mutation to be lactose tolerant. So that was something that's radically different because all the farmers, they're just eating wheat, and that's not really good because you don't get enough nutrients.
Yeah.
But when this happens to these Indo-Europeans, where suddenly they can get all these new calories from cows, that doesn't make them sick. They have a huge advantage, and they're still like hunter-gatherers, so they're a lot taller, a lot more stronger, and they easily outcompete the farmers wherever they went, whether it's India, Persia, But I suspect there's a reason why Indo or Europeans essentially have a very individualistic mindset. It's because of that mutation that allowed them to drink milk, but also rearing cattle. Farming is a very individualistic it's not very beneficial if you had a collective because you want to keep your own cattle, and you may trade or you might steal other people's cattle. So it's very to your own business. And
they've still got that in Africa today,
Oh yeah, exactly. I think it's that area near Nigeria that also has a big representation of people who are lactose tolerant.
Yeah, no. For weddings, they still kind of not introduced. They offer cattle as a sign of wealth.
And I suspect that's why Nigerians are very successful because they are phenomenally where they have an individualistic mindset and are good in business and all that stuff.
See, that's weird because I know people know the story about the Iceman and the Fireman and stuff like that. The Southerners born in a hot, nice, warm climate in comparison to the ice cactus and so on.
It essentially means that the dumb people die quicker in the north, whilst the people in the warmer areas, they don't have to go through a lot of obstacles, whether it's the cold winters or lack of food, because there's always things that are growing.
But the thing is, when you say that it's something that genetically happened, the reason I would disagree...
Like the Black Death was very beneficial for Europeans, but it meant that the smart ones were the ones who survived and planned ahead, and that's how the genes kind of like escalated to being more sophisticated than the other.
Would it have been a good thing for Europe had they not learned about pathogens and medicine and the quarantining of animals into so and so?
That's why the Jews managed to survive the plagues, because they were
knowledgeable of these things.
And that's what pisses me off with Christians, saying like, if Jesus is so great, why didn't he say wash your hands? Because he said specifically you don't have to follow that law of Moses because it's not God's law.
Yeah.
But you can like eat food without washing your hands and saying like, yeah, well done. You just you could have sold so many deaths and like.
I mean, again, I don't know where we've just gone from leftist to think, but just to address that point in particular, I was just wondering, especially nowadays, we're seeing this resurge of kind of like people, and I would like to address this with yourself, and you can join in if you'd like on this one. We're seeing this massive resurgence of people who, in my general opinion, are virtue signaling this need to be British, this need to be a nationalist, this need to be kind of like akin to one tribe and make it clear. And people often kind of like make this joke, right? There used to be this joke back in the day. There's a guy who's in the urinal, right? And the guy enters the toilet. So out of all the urinals, the guy comes next to this guy in the urinal, and they're both taking a leak. He leans over and he says, "I'm a vegan." And I don't get what is it specifically about being a British nationalist that people really want to cling on and hold on to. I have no issue with it, but there seems to be such a driven effort to kind of push this narrative upon people who don't really use it in their day-to-day life.
Well, there's an idea that you can't truly have democracy unless you've got nations. You've got the nation state.
A nation is a family, a extended family.
But then some people would argue that you will always have primitive democracies, which is normally originated within family units. So the idea that, if you wanted to migrate to X, Y, and Z, you would consult with your family first. You would decide upon the number of people in agreement and the number of people who were in disagreement. That's primitive democracy. So the idea that you need an establishment to have a democracy, it's not necessarily something.
But a child leaving the family doesn't necessarily know better.
Nation states have been very efficient units for organising things within homogenous people.
I can agree. But what about being British? Does that need to? What's the word? What isolates being British with democracy?
People want to.
It's more the tradition, I think.
Sorry?
The tradition.
I don't think it's just that. There are people who like to be in control of what happens in the area in which they live.
That's why the monarchy works, because they're accountable and therefore, they will serve the people.
I presented a gentleman with this kind of theory as well. It's almost like similar to the human body. When we have pathogens that enter, or foreign bodies that enter our human body, right? We have skin, we have epidermis, right? Which blocks certain things from getting in there because we like to keep a homeostasis. We like to keep everything in our body as we acknowledge it, as we kind of recognize it. But when something like a flu goes inside your veins, your body has an instant reaction to getting that flu out. You get more kind of, inflammation, and then this is why you get like bumps, you get sick, you get symptoms, and you start to sneeze, etc. And you can almost see this as the national backlash of more migration into certain continents. Now, my question is, these kind of antibodies only seem to happen when it is proven that a certain pathogen or a certain strain is counterproductive to your whole body, your whole biological system. What about migration have we seen is counterproductive to British culture? Or the British establishment?
Because they're not sending their best.
But do we need more doctors or do we need more labourers?
Saudi Arabia has, and Japan was going to have to adopt this model where they are going to have contracted migration to do certain jobs, but know that they got a limited time of how long they stay. Mm-hmm. So, I think that's a healthy way to approach it.
I was going to say, but Saudi Arabia is probably a bad example for that, and especially somewhere within the Arabian Peninsula, because our Arabian culture has been very kind of like known to kind of keep their culture intact, to make sure that political powers are kept homogenous. Mm-hmm. Like that's the rule of like any empire, right? If you want to keep firm power over your own empire, you keep it homogenous, because the more you start to mix with different tribes, the less and less your powers has more gravity, because these different tribes have different leaders, right? So when your women in particular, I'll give you an example, when your women start to reproduce with men of other cultures, the men tend to, in theory, they tend to dominate the politics within the household. And that means that you have a group of women from your population that have now gone to different tribes. You have less people within your thing. Now, the question is that something that we really need to worry about nowadays, considering that from where I stand, I feel like all cultures have the same goal?
Mm-hmm. I don't think it's a cultural issue. I think,
you mean the same goal that we all get mixed?
No.
Oh, okay.
Not quite yet.
The issues at the moment are about scale.
Okay.
So there's a net increase, and has been for the last decade, of approximately 300,000 extra people in the country every year.
Yeah.
So it's about numbers and the feeling that it's out of control. It's not being controlled.
I can't afford a place. We'll stop bringing 2,000 migrants a week here. Or the NHS can't cope. We'll stop bringing 2,000 migrants every week.
Well, property prices going up and
prices.
wages under constant pressure from additional
Can't get
people.
employed. Well,
It's not necessarily about
I believe.
ideologically about culture. No,
I mean, as a nationalist, I accept that we have to make sacrifices, and I think it's good for every nation to have a bit of spice, But you don't want too much spice, otherwise it ruins the meal, or whether it's like a beverage where you want it, like a cocktail has a bit of vodka, but it's mostly
the drink itself.
Exactly. So that's how I think that a healthy demographics we should be aiming for like 10% be from a different background, because at least it maintains the characteristics of the people who they who their ancestors in that nation look like. And the people that they're more of a guest but still are good patriotic members of that society, the adopted tribe, and even mix. I think it's I think why the British were so successful is because there was this ability to expand. They knew that they were British and were supremacists, if you want to put it that. But at the same time, they wanted to learn from other people, and yes, it was a bit iffy of mixing, but I think when you mix, you get more of a wider gene pool, and that will result in more geniuses, and that will, accelerate society.
Yeah.
So it's about balance, I say.
No, I absolutely agree, and I think, again, that's a rational way to put it. I was going to say in particular, when we talk about these issues, though, do you not think that it's important that we get not our facts right, because that sounds very kind of like condescending, more kind of like we actually illuminate the issue as it is, as opposed to what we're being fed? Because if we're being honest, when we're talking about property prices rising in value, they're not rising because migrants are coming from across. Migrants have been coming across since World War II, and the property values haven't risen as dramatically
but not at the same rate as they are now.
I was going to address that. So I lived in Bethnal Green in particular, and that became a very hot spot for like the property prices boosting, Shoreditch, that kind of area, right? The majority of people moving there were white middle class people. This is what gentrification is. White middle class people move to an area they can afford a little bit more rent, and they bring up the market of that area. So that has literally nothing to do with migrants. And just to further kind of like hit that home as well, Bethnal Green before the kind of gentrification era of 2012, after that 2014, it was the Olympics 2012 kind of like brought around that kind of a popular East London kind of a thing, because before then it was Cockney. It was Cockney. It was working class Cockney area. It was mainly working class people that lived there. But now
no Cockneys anymore.
No Cockneys no more. But again, it's the same. Even Asian people who used to live there have been ousted and moved further along the the zone 1, zone 2. And now most of them you find in zone 3.
Yeah, I don't think you can just ignore the supply and demand situation. It's forcing prices up. 300,000 extra people coming in a year when homes aren't increasing by that number.
But the only thing is, I was going to say is,
of course, if people are competing for the available homes, that's going to, just like in an auction, in a lottery, pushes the prices up.
Absolutely, but the thing is, these aren't migrants who are, competing for the auctions. If you go to Bethnal Green now, the population in comparison to back when, majority of it has been increased to middle class whites.
It's whatever the market will bear. If you've got people looking for housing, they're going to get that house, they're going to pay as much as they can afford.
But this is the question. The question is, why do we focus the argument around migration when the argument is literally supply and demand, and it's middle class Brits who are bringing up the prices? An example of this as well is the fact that we don't find, I hear this a lot from working class Brits, the fact that we don't have genuine pubs anymore. And what are these pubs being turned into? They're not being turned into curry shops, they're not being turned into PFCs, they're being turned into trendy bars. That's what they're being turned into. Now that's nothing to do with migration, that's everything to do with middle class mentality of what is a good time.
But you acknowledge that there are many migrants who are, fervent supporters of UKIP because they do say that, I had to earn my way here, but these migrants are just coming here for free and are ruining what I built here and what I earned. They're just like getting all this free shit,
Can I answer that quickly? Because that's actually a really important topic, because I think we've seen this like massive kind of like she has nice boobs. Your camera.
Do you know the UK is England is the densest, one of the most dense populated parts of the world.
Yeah.
3 times denser population square kilometre than France, for example. Double that of Germany.
Yeah.
So that's going to push up property prices. Just the
It
density
depends
of
on our
population.
economics. It depends on our economics.
And politicians just won't address it. They just say we haven't got enough houses, but we can't just carry on concreting over the whole of the southeast of England.
It's true, but the problem is, I guess, this is where again the whole idea of being a leftist is. It's about moderating prosperity, so to speak. It's the fact of you say that, like you say, we can't just keep building houses over, like you said, the southeast of England and providing to this massive demand. But the thing is, we benefit off this economic prosperity, and we keep pushing this economic prosperity because it's better for us.
It can't go on forever. I mean, it's unsustainable.
In theory, it can't, yeah.
So much land. Huge amount of it is already concreted over. We've got enough roads. We don't need more roads, more towns, cities.
But that's property corporations, though, isn't it?
We're running out of
Yeah, but
water
the
apparently.
corporations
And the same consumption at the moment. They say with the population increase, we're going to have to build more reservoirs. Do we really want to flood more river valleys? So we.
No, you're absolutely right. No, yeah.
I mean,
we'll have no
you laugh,
farmland
but I mean,
No,
in another 10 years there'll be
yeah.
another 3 million people here.
Absolutely.
It just can't go on forever.
But gentlemen, again, for me personally, the population isn't a problem. Gentleman over here kind of painted it quite well when he said, only like less than 50 years ago or so, we had 3 billion people on the planet or so, and now we have 7 billion people on the planet. And people were complaining back then that, this population boom is going to see like, such a disruption in society, and we're going to have mass chaos and so on and so. And it didn't meet that. Like, we live much better because of it. We have more people, we have more labour. And just to quickly touch up on that, there was a gentleman back in the day during the time of Marx as well who wrote up a paper basically theorizing the fact that the world's resources are finite and we can only support this level of humanity. And after that, like, it would just be mass chaos. And I think his number was 1 point something billion. We're at 7 billion now. So we got to be careful not to scaremonger arguments into
It's just about what our country can cope with the infrastructure and the facilities that we have. So if you go to a nightclub and there's a bouncer on the door and he says fire regulations say we've reached the limit, we can't let any more in.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's not racist, is it?
It's not.
No. Well, our country is pretty much nearly full.
But the elites don't want to solve the immigration issue is because that
they make money off the labour.
Not only that, they also want conflict with the population. They want there to be high stress and fighting among themselves and being suspicious of each other, rather than being focused on the true enemy, which is them, who are pulling the strings.
But this is what the left is.
They can control divided people easier than if they're all united on the same cause. I mean, I think Singapore is the only country, actually city-state. In fact, the reason it's a city-state is one of the reasons it works, but also it's a police state, there are very strict rules, otherwise they didn't have that in place, then who knows what would happen with all the conflict of being different in terms of race or culture or religion or whatever you want to call it.
Just on a quick question as well, right? The idea is that, obviously, like you say, the facility is full, the bouncer says we cannot, accept any more people, and I absolutely agree with that argument. Problem is, I don't see the capacity just yet being hit, and then furthermore, when we do hit the capacity, what sound argument will the masses present for there to be a halt in migration? because ultimately migration speaks to economics, and the fact is most people are moving here not because of the quality of life, not because of the politics, not because of the idealism. They're here for money, they're here to work. So the question is, if you want people to stop coming, then ultimately we're asking for the stall or the halt of economic prosperity. Is that what you really want?
I want all countries to have a strong capitalistic mentality that.
I was talking about the UK. We're talking about the UK in particular, to stop migration coming here. So we're talking about stopping economic prosperity over here, to decrease the kind of appeal for migration to come here.
But it's making those countries that are poorer because we're taking their best. You know?
Say that again? Absolutely. No, I absolutely agree. I agree.
So don't you think it would be more advantageous for everyone to stay and try to build up their own community?
I absolutely agree.
Yeah,
absolutely.
But that's the thing. The globalists don't want that. They want the West to be flooded with these people in order to have a lot more controlling, easier way to control the masses. You know.
I don't know. I think that's more what's the word? A symptom than it is a kind of like.
It is a simple tactic, divide and conquer.
It's a symptom more. It is the actual kind of like primary goal. I think their primary goal is.
Oh, they'll say economics, but do you think if we have automation that will do all the jobs that the labour would, working labour would do you think that we don't need immigration anymore? You know, do you think that's going to happen?
Well, this is the thing. When we talk about automation, again, it's a very long way away. I do a bit of DIY myself. Go on.
I think we should try a lot harder to be self-sufficient in the skills that we're short of. Because we don't train enough of our own doctors and nurses. We don't train enough of our own building trades.
It's working here.
So if we did more of that,
more
of that ourselves, then we wouldn't need to rob nurses from African countries, which might be increasing the Ebola problem now. It's fairly immoral to be taking skills away from countries just because we can afford to pay them more and that they can get back in their own country.
Yeah,
we've been lazy. Extremely lazy.
I say this a lot, and I say this to. No, I do say this to a lot of a lot of working class people, because you do go to certain towns like Rochdale, you do go to certain towns like Rotherham, and you do find a lazy culture of people who don't really want to work and make trade.
Well, they used to have jobs like mining, but as soon as they get on the welfare, they're just going to have broken families where their children don't respect them.
But the times move on, and ultimately you either adapt or you...
This idea of a universal basic income, that's very expensive. With that money, you could afford to be training these working class communities up to do the jobs that
what if they don't really want to do the jobs?
Well, at the moment, there isn't the training, and the wages are fairly low because there's so many people coming in from abroad. The pressure on wages is down. So if that's reduced and the training goes up, they'll earn more. There'll be more incentives to work because it's going to be far more worthwhile for them to do.
But as someone who's from a millennial kind of like, I guess, a millennial background-ish kind of thing, like I'm amateurly trained in many kind of areas. I mean, I've worked in retail, I've worked in catering, I'm now in reception, I'm now in admin. I've been able to jump from possible job to job, from area to area, and my ultimate goal is to become a stuntman at the end of this. I'm also quite well an electrician. Like, you know, the idea that the training is not out there. There's so many courses online that cater to these things. There's so many ways, like there's so much time nowadays that we have to read up all of these skills that you, again, half the time you don't even need a qualification. If you have the experience and you can demonstrate it, you probably could land a job. So when you say that there's not the training out there and there's not the ability out there to I guess exceed your kind of like circumstances, I would have to disagree.
I think if you're one of the most motivated people, then you will definitely succeed. However, there are communities like you're saying in Rochdale that have lost that, or if they were in these traditional industries, they were just there for them to go to. They need a bit of a leg up,
and it's not going to lead to healthy children who need a good structure and understanding responsibility.
So controversial.
Are you allowed to have a speaker?
No, you're not. So controversial question: are the working class and the majority masses of the British being spread out via the system of survival of the fittest?
We need to.
Controversial. It's a controversial question.
I think we need to debate and discuss this at great length because there are communities that are left behind, and there are multiple reasons for that.
Okay.
It's an intergenerational thing. It's an educational thing. It's even a welfare thing where it doesn't encourage family units to stick together.
Okay, I can agree. Okay.
It needs to be addressed on multiple levels, and we've always taken the easy option is to bring in people from abroad. Then you don't have to deal with this really tricky problem of bringing up communities and people that don't have a tradition.
And the people coming here aren't taught to integrate or even really respect the indigenous population.
Do they have to necessarily? I don't agree with the fact that they don't. But
it's just the golden rule. Be treated how you would want to be treated.
Well, let me give you an example. If you have a nanny, right, and she's an American nanny, no, a Mexican nanny.
Yeah.
She goes to an American household to look after the kids. Is it really custom that she knows the American Constitution? Is it custom that she knows speaks American? Is it obligational that she really kind of like adheres to the American culture, or are they just there to employ her for the fact that she's a nanny and she needs to look after the kids?
Nannies usually go home, don't they? Like au pairs. That was the tradition. They go home after a while.
Absolutely, but that's what I'm trying to say.
And it feels like if you're invited to a house, you won't just take advantage of everything. But you don't understand that there are boundaries,
But the thing is, they're coming there as workers. So
they still don't understand the boundaries.
No, absolutely. But do they owe it to understand the boundaries, or are they just there for the work?
Again, it's just how would they like it if it was reversed,
Well, that's the question. A lot of people who do bring up this thing point out the example that when we did have a colonial empire, Britain made mini Britons within different countries because they didn't want to integrate into other societies.
They created ghettos for themselves. Well, that's not very good to have discrete, independent communities.
It's not.
Ghettoized in their own culture around the country. I mean, rather than integration, I think the idea of interaction, at least, is a better idea.
I can agree with that.
If people want to keep their own culture, but if they interact with others, then I think generally that will keep people happy.
So, just so I'm clear, in particular, you don't agree with the fact that corporations are driving business to the prosperity point where Britons don't matter anymore, and
I'm not saying that.
the culture doesn't matter anymore, and so on. So
the bankers definitely don't care.
Yeah, and what you want to see is more of a I don't know how to pronounce. I don't know how to say it. More of an allegiance to the native people than an allegiance to the profit.
I don't know about native, but the people that are here legally now, we need to maximise their utilisation. Utilise them to the maximum, train them up, give them as many opportunities as possible.
But at the end of the day, I reflect the statues here for the British heroes or whatever. I can play William Shakespeare or all these other British characters, which you would never be able to do. But on the outside, I can never play Shaka Zulu. So
but the thing is, ultimately, why do you feel like you have more of a claim to Shakespeare than I do?
It's like inheriting a house.
But that's the problem. If you don't know the Shakespearean language and you inherit the Shakespearean books, but I can read Shakespeare and you can't, who is more entitled to those books?
Well, I would say I think the Chinese are entitled to Sun Tzu's The Art of War, even though I could also take pride and a fondness for the teachings that they give.
Not necessarily. The reason I say this is because, again, when I meet a lot of British people, I find I have more British qualities than they do, and that's not to say that I'm more British than you, kind of thing. But I do have.
I think you're an outlier.
I do have more of the refined qualities that reflect a British nobleman than most people, and that is my taste in music. That is the way that I conduct myself, the language that I use, the mannerisms that I kind of portray. A lot of the times when people do hear me on the phone before they speak to me, they assume that I am white, and that again goes to speak as to what is British and what isn't. So the idea that
it's not so much being British. It's like a lot of people be so into Japanese culture and, go and move there, they have children, but in the end of the day, they realise that they will never be as Japanese as the indigenous Japanese,
Well, the only thing is, again, I agree and I disagree with that. I understand that there's a certain phenotype and a certain look that is associated with certain people, but that can change over time when the demographic changes and the label changes, and ultimately a different face comes about. Because again, like you say, we look at Greece now. We look at Greece, and I see a lot of people who are Hellenistic enthusiasts, right? Acclaim that Greeks were Europeans, but Greeks never called themselves Europeans.
But they did have blonde hair.
Say that again?
They did have blonde hair.
But they weren't European.
Well, they're Indo-European,
There's more of an argument to be made that they're more kind of like akin to people within the Middle East than they are in the Scandinavian era. Because when we look at ancient Greece, right, there was more influence from the Arabian Peninsula than there was from Germany, than there was from Norway, than there was from Finland and Iceland and all these places.
Oh yeah, but
when people talk about the Greco-Roman Empire and the Western civilization and so on, so I look at the trajectory of Greek, the Greek philosophy, Greek origins, and it doesn't go in a natural path of Europe. It doesn't do that. It starts Greece, gets invaded by the Romans, muddly period, and then bear in mind, in all of this time, the west of Europe is divorced from the rest of Europe. It's like
there were a lot of migrations into Greece from the Slavic people.
There was a lot of animosity between the two.
Oh yeah.
They saw them as savages. They saw them as barbarians, and they didn't really find them as refined. I mean, Cicero said himself. He came here to Britain and he said that I could not find a good slave amongst them. They don't play music. They're not refined.
Yeah, they grew up in a different environment.
Yeah, but there was such a divorce in cultures. Yeah, no, there was such a divorce in cultures in terms of like West Europe and like Central Europe.
Oh, yeah, you get Arminius, or Herman the German.
Yeah,
he was he was a part of the German prince and tribe, but the Romans took him and they brought him up to be a Roman, and he was basically it was like he was as Roman as everyone else because he both looked Roman, but he was also culturally Roman.
Yeah, but that's like one example. In comparison to the multitude of angles that you can go to the fact that the Arabian Peninsula, which is the Middle East, influenced the ancient Greece that we now know.
Oh yeah.
In comparison to Western thing, but people within Western, like Germany in particular, right? People who are in America, who are in the UK, and talk about the Greco-Roman Empire, will always attribute their kind of success and their historical kind of consistent success to the Greco-Roman Empire. But there is literally no link whatsoever.
Oh, don't you think the gods are similar?
The gods?
Yeah.
The gods, you can go from not just Greece, but you can go from Greece to Egypt.
That's what the pagan mindset was, that they acknowledged there were loads of different gods, not just their own gods, and sometimes they could ironically be the same god, they've just been called different names,
But do you remember with polytheism as well, like there's so many gods that are, like, they resemble each other to a T, and bear in mind this is from, like, gods from China, gods from ancient Greece, ancient India, Egypt, and even further than Egypt as well. We had the Orisis in Africa as well. So, even that's a very kind of like bland claim to anything. So I find it...
Maybe they're all connected then.
Say that again?
Maybe they're all connected to some degree.
I'm of that mindset.
Yeah, same.
I'm genuinely of that mindset. I've always been of that mindset.
At the end of the day, they still, when they knew there were different races, they understood that the boundaries were where they were. And then by the end of the day, I perfectly accept that might mix right, and if we do get mixed out, or taken over by a different cultural race, then fair play. But if they...
It's the first I've heard someone say that.
On the same side, if they do get kicked out, that's also fair play.
Look, I mean, I think ultimately when I have this debate with like white nationalists in particular, my ultimate question is, you cannot have an ethno-nationalist society without dictating people's choices.
I wouldn't call myself ethno-nationalist, I'm more of a first worldist.
No, fair enough. You can have a civic nationalist as well, though. A civic nationalist is someone who believes in the nationalism of their own country, but allows
civic nationalism is a strand of what the globalist elites have thrown in there to model things.
Oh, I thought it was a Marxist idea. The idea that you can have a pride within your own boundary or territory of land and the people within it, but you also have a tolerance and an acceptance of incoming foreigners as well. That's what civic nationalist was supposedly.
I've been hearing people say that generally we're living in a post-racial society here in the UK. Do you not think so?
Nationalism is growing, especially in Europe. And there's going to be like a big.
But is that more to do with democracy rather than
stress?
Race?
It's stress. These societies aren't trustworthy of other people.
People don't want to be told what to do by some centre of an empire somewhere, where they have little or no control over decisions in their traditional country or nation.
Yeah.
So we have a bit of a paradox going on. We've got parts of, just in the UK, we've got devolution to Scotland, to Wales, to Ireland, and then we've got Belgium. They're thinking, should they split? Because you've got two different sections. You've got the Walloons and the Frisians, and they quite like to organise their own issues. A bit of autonomy there, and the same in Catalonia. But so the paradox is that while this is going on, and people want decisions made at the lowest level possible, the paradox is that centralising is going on in Brussels.
Okay, yeah.
So we've got two competing powers. There is what some people would call an empire being built in Europe. They've got a national anthem. They've got a flag. It's quite actually jingoistic now. They're getting an army. Are we actually getting rid of nationalism by all becoming part of an EU, which is becoming more and more like a nation state itself?
I remember the people running the EU want to bring as many Africans into Europe, so that the whole new race will look like Egyptians, essentially. Ancient Egyptians.
I think that's a tinfoil theory for.
That is written down by that guy who was one of the founders, who was also mixed race, and he said that the European will become a new race called the Eurasian Negroid race or whatever. So.
Okay, interesting. I'll have a look into that, but I think that's more of a tinfoil theory.
With the Marrakesh Convention, I think that's an issue. I think they want to start bringing in North Africa into the sphere of influence.
Was that not more in response to the labour force needed, as opposed to like?
No, I think it may be ideological.
It doesn't shrink; it always expands, and it wants to be like a world order.
Do you remember, this wasn't like the EU was not made in a vacuum. The EU was made after the situations of World War II, and there was a shortage in labour that needed to be filled. So they got countries. Bear in mind, it wasn't just all North African countries. It was countries that were in the Commonwealth. So it was countries that they had control over. It was countries that they had, people with. They had rule over. So when we do talk about, like I said, the exerted effort to kind of get people to come over, etc. There was a situation before that, the world wars, that kind of set that precedent for us. If there wasn't a world war, we wouldn't have this. And this is one of the things that I need to read up on the EU. So, full disclosure, I don't know everything about the EU.
Is it not becoming a bit jingoistic with the EU flag and the ode to joy? And some of my friends will not countenance any criticism of the EU. It's tough. They're happy to tell me about the EU, but they don't want to listen to me criticise.
It's like, is it any different to the Nazis' occupation of Europe? It's making the youth like the new Hitler youth, where they're just patriotic.
I think there's quite a few distinct differences between Nazi. I mean, there's
some similarities, like love of nation.
No, I understand.
Instead of the SS, it's now Antifa.
But here's the thing,
there's a similarity there.
No, I understand, but again, when we're talking about, I think people like Sargon Akkad, Count Dankula and all these people, let's not forget that the Nazis, very different regime. They believed in.
Count Dankula's pug is not a Nazi. It's not possible for a dog to be a Nazi.
But the only thing is it really within good faith to kind of mock fun at something that was such a dark event?
He was mocking the Nazis.
We are mocking them. Yeah, exactly. It's
he was mocking the Nazis.
The musical. The musical The Producers.
Yeah.
Springtime for Hitler. It's just satirical fun.
If he did that in Nazi Germany, he would have been shot or sent to a concentration camp by the Nazis for teaching a pug to do that.
Yeah, the Nazis do not want to be made fun of at all.
So, I understand the idea that it is a joke, and the thing is, I can humor it when people are consistent. When people aren't consistent, that's where I draw the line. Like for me in particular.
You think it's just dog whistling too?
No, I think people like Sargon and Count Dankula are no different to right-wing social justice warriors, in my opinion. Like the idea that, again, he made this joke and it was just a joke and so, fair enough. The problem is he did it to upset his liberal girlfriend, right? And ultimately we can laugh about it, but there's some there's some sadistic nature in that, in the idea that
when you go on 4chan, you understand.
The reason I
Humour
would
can
not
be cruel. Sometimes that's why it's funny.
But that's the thing though. When put it this way, if someone were to go to a World War II memorial and desiccate on the statue because they found it humorous, would you find that humorous?
That's first of all private property issue.
It's not the same.
Not necessarily. Not all statues are private property.
I think if you did that, you wouldn't get the same laughs.
I understand, but
that.
would that be funny to yourself?
It's different.
It's not different. It's not different. The Holocaust is very real to some people. It's very real to the Jewish people. It's very real to certain people who feel.
But can it also be dangerous if there's so much, things you cannot say about it?
No, we'll get to that.
People
We'll
get
get to
arrested
that.
for the most trivial things.
But we'll get to that. It's not a thing that Count Dankula went, you know what, I really want to read up on this Holocaust denial and find out what's going on. He didn't say that. No, he poked fun at a situation that is quite dark. And I'm not one of these people who puts a complete stall on everyone's fun, but I have to address the fact that he did it because he said that it would cause discomfort in his liberal girlfriend. Why did he know it would cause discomfort in his liberal girlfriend? Because his liberal girlfriend understands the hurt and the loss that is associated with Nazi Germany.
No, I don't think so. I think it was about the cute little dog.
No, that's what he said.
Doing a Nazi salute. So,
and that's why he taught the dog. That's why he taught the dog to upset his girlfriend.
So you're pointing yourself as a humour police or something like
It's not a humour police. It's just the fact that it's not really something that you would want to promote in your society. Would you really want to promote that kind of just
I don't think
journalism?
It's not promoting. It's almost like irony,
So, like I said again, if someone came and desiccated on all the World War statues for humour, would you accept that?
It's not the same.
What's the difference between the two?
Because the pug is to show how silly Nazis are.
But he did it.
Your example is just someone vandalising something.
But it's their idea of humour.
Yeah, but you're still vandalising something.
The pug to show how silly the Nazis were, but
you're not vandalising the pug, just teaching it to.
I suppose it comes down to
you guys said that
intention. It's not the intention of desecrating a memorial.
Yeah,
It's probably got some hate behind it.
Has it?
It probably won't be done for humour.
Why wouldn't it be done for humour?
Well, it doesn't appear to me to be.
If a laugh towards the genocide of a good million Jews can be humorized, why can't the desiccation of?
Well, it wasn't about that. It was about the dog.
That's exactly what he said. It's in his court documents. That is literally what he said.
Yeah, but the context is completely different.
That's his context.
Yeah. So why have we stop policing
why are we
people's
changing
speech?
the context?
So what? It's just purely subjective. What one person takes the joke to mean. So we
this
can't,
is exactly what I'm trying to say.
that.
You need to be consistent, and you need to be fair.
Well, it's different for every single person in the world how they would take a joke, and you can't be policing offence like that. That's just,
So, like I said,
it's not possible.
would you find it acceptable if someone for humour desiccated on all the World War II memorials? Would you accept that? It's just point blank, I guess.
Again,
think it's comparable.
humour has no limits, really.
It has no limits.
But again, vandalising.
So
I think
this is
it's
the thing: if you would not support someone desiccating, and whether or not it's vandalism, whatever, he's doing it in the sense of trying to make something humorous out of it. You wouldn't accept that, but you accept someone poking fun at their liberal girlfriend who has sentimental values towards the death of Jews.
Maybe you could make him a challenge to make a joke around desecrating a memorial.
Well,
maybe you could.
I'll give you an example. There was a lady who I believe brought up. It was in the university down in South somewhere, and she wanted to take down the statue because the statue in particular had been linked to, even though it was a war hero, it had been linked to various historical atrocities. The right wing, Sargon, and all of their fans got so outraged that they pummeled her university with complaints and letters. She lost her place in the university and lost her job.
I don't think we should police humour.
I don't think we should police humour.
If people find it offensive, then they can not listen or go and find someone else they find funny.
So then, do we accept the desiccation of statues?
If someone was making an image that was, doing like hey, or image-wise, I wouldn't care. But if it's actually, if it's like a physical thing that you're doing on something that is privately owned, then that's
vandalism.
But the problem is, when you say privately owned, how do you privately own a statue in particular which has been put there for public admiration towards a public hero for a public service? So even though you're talking about a private statue, which not all the statues are private, again, we continue, right? Not all the statues are private. Would we accept the desiccation of World War II heroes, people who sacrificed their lives so we can have the privileges that we have today in the name of humour?
You're trying to compare...
but you haven't drawn the difference between the two.
To bring these things together, and they're not the same. You're
you
talking about vandalism and trying to compare that with a joke.
If I remember correctly,
vandalism and jokes are different things.
Count Dankler
making
did
fun of a genocide isn't a joke either.
No, he was saying that the girlfriend said, "Oh, the pug is so cute. There's nothing that you could do that would be adorable." Say, "Okay, I'm gonna make it the most horrible thing I could possibly imagine," and obviously that was being a Nazi.
So the Nazis, where you go, that's someone's natural. That's someone's natural.
He's saying the most unadorable or
Well, here's the thing. There's so many other things you can do before that. You could shave the dog. You could you could grow a mustache on the dog. There's so many things that you can do to make a dog.
It was funny, and I laughed.
Yeah,
that's the thing. So you're not laughing. You're not laughing at the idea of desiccated statues.
But that's vandalism. It's different.
How is it vandalism?
If you desecrate a statue,
desiccation is not vandalism.
If he took a picture,
vandalism
vandalism
is damage. Desecration doesn't damage a statue.
Yeah, but it's still stained.
Yeah, but that's not vandalism. Let's just take that off the table. It's not vandalism.
Oh, right, whether it's called, it's still.
So you're talking about like defecating on us?
Yeah,
defecating.
Just
on a
burying yourself in public and just.
I think it is a crime. I think someone did do something like that and got done for it. If it's a crime,
probably public indecent exposure. Yeah, but if they did it during the middle of the night, just went on it, took a photo, posted it around the world, saying, "Haha."
I think it's still illegal.
This is what I think of the World War II effort site.
All right. If it was unintentional, then yeah, that'd be funny.
But this is what I'm trying to say. You're putting limitations on other people's humour. You're putting limitations, and you're putting.
No, it is a law. There is a law about.
But there's also a law against hate speech and hate crime. That's why Dankler was actually brought up, because he broke a law. So now that we're bringing legality into it.
I think that the only thing that made it illegal is that he put it online. He could have done it in a show. He could have done it in a theatre. He could have done it on television. But the only thing that he did was illegal was to break the Communications Act, the 1930 Communications Act, I think it was. It's about wireless communication.
Okay, so he still broke a law, though.
He broke the Wireless Communication Act.
So you're agreeing with his ability to break the law, but not someone else's.
No, I don't think that law should. I think that law should be repealed.
But desiccating statues shouldn't.
No, I see that as different.
Yeah, they're symbols. They're symbols there for a reason.
But do you see where people draw problems with this? Because
I don't see the equivalence there.
You have people who are making fun of a situation that's not really funny. You have so many other things you can make fun of. It's not funny at all. you found it hilarious. But the moment someone desiccates a statue is what? It doesn't really represent much. The memory is what's important. But you're already getting offended at the idea of someone desiccating a statue.
Yeah, but it's also art.
Say that again?
It's art. The statue.
Nazi Germany is also a memory that is still well and alive in certain people. People survived Nazi Germany.
Yeah, no.
So
I suppose
it's still alive.
the difference is the jokes are subjective, and you were describing a physical act. Maybe there's a difference there.
There's no difference. There's no difference. There's one that's offending or one that's minimizing the suffering and the sacrifice of a certain people, and there's another one that's minimizing and demonizing.
I think there's a slippery slope argument.
It's like saying all the Nazis are city for
I haven't made any assertions in terms
offence.
I haven't made any assertions in terms of policing the offence. The only people who've made assertions is yourselves. You've actually said that you would disagree with someone desiccating the statue. And I've just given you the example of the fact that Count Dankula broke laws, and there are hate speech laws to making fun of certain things like that have dark themes and causing civil unrest. There are actually laws on this in the EU and the UN.
Yeah,
the only people who was offending was Nazis.
Say that again?
The only people who was offending were Nazis.
I'm pretty sure
if he's saying a word in the context that it was used.
There were no Jews that complained.
Say that again?
There's no Jews that complained.
There were no Jews that complained.
They had to find one in order to.
Yeah,
Are you being
the
serious? There are no Jews that complain. You can go on YouTube and there'd be a ton of videos of Jews making it clear that they're not happy about
when
it.
he was arrested and charged, there were no complaints from Jews. It wasn't initiated from a complaint from the Jewish community or a Jewish person.
What difference does that make? There was still a population of Jewish people
Someone
that were
took
offended.
offence on behalf of somebody else. He said, that might offend somebody, but they didn't actually complain. There were no complaints.
Your problem is not the fact that there was something to take offence via. It's the people who lodged the complaint for the offence in the first place, which was a crime.
I think it was the policeman that...
Which was a crime, anyway, so we're not...
took offence on someone else's behalf, and it's very subjective. The law talks about gross offence. I mean, it's down to the judge.
I think it's quite clear on what offence is. It's not the idea of someone
subjective.
Not really. It's not the idea that I can wear red and then someone doesn't like red and then they can call the cops on me. No, it's quite.
I think it needs to be defined.
It is defined. It's not.
Yeah,
but
no. It should only come on terms of law if they're inciting violence.
That's one of the main points as well.
I will accept dark humour even if it's about raping white girls in Rotherham or whatever. But if they're inciting violence, then that's when people will have to.
I think that's where we detach. But no.
The way the law is written is that if something grossly offensive is communicated wirelessly. And it was the judge to decide what he subjectively felt was grossly offensive.
And you don't understand why in particular...
Yeah, but that could be, one judge may think it was and another person might not think.
I'll go now, but what's the new look here? Inspired by?
This in particular?
Yeah.
My go-kart should be ready soon, so you'll see it soon. But yeah, the idea that offence in particular can only be... it's subjective. The rule of offence is subjective. That rule is not really subjective. They make it quite clear that there are certain things that you can't say and certain things that you can say. I'll give you an example. People keep using the example of if you run into a cinema and yell fire even though there's no fire, you'll probably be arrested and you'll probably be charged because there's no fire and you're creating mass panic for no reason.
Yeah, but that's not about offence. That's creating a panic, isn't
absolutely,
it? Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, the idea is that these narratives, or the narrative of the supposed kind of like minimizing of Jewish suffering, came from Nazi Germany. And they see certain themes or certain elements within people's joke as akin to those of Nazi Germany. So it's not saying that Sargon or Count Dankula in particular are pushing Nazi regimes, but they want to limit that sort of speech so that we don't arrive in the same situation again. I'll give you an example as to how we have arrived in the same situation. We have Donald Trump in the American states. Donald Trump has legitimized certain language. He's legitimized certain theologies, he's legitimized certain ideologies. And now we're seeing a rise in actual hate crime. We're seeing 257% rise in hate crime. How does that work? how can you say that certain humor, right, is non-offensive and doesn't have real-life implications, but then we have someone who legitimizes that form of humor, and we have legitimate rise in hate crimes?
I don't think they're connected. I think you'll get...
Analysts have said they are.
That might be subjective, but I don't think you'll get the results that you desire by policing people's offence. I think you will get the exact opposite.
But then
you'll get a breakdown of trust between the people and the authorities.
But
it's worked to be governed.
It's worked before, because before this period where we started to legitimize the most extreme, the most abhorrent, and the most kind of, discomforting rhetoric and certain kind of like narratives. We didn't have this level of hate crime. We didn't have this level of racial tensions. We had relative integration. We had cooperation between the races. We didn't have this level of race baiting day to day, in and out.
Do we?
Really? We have the Rotherham grooming gang scandal that happened supposedly a year ago. Everyone was blaming Muslims for that. When has that happened historically? We have African migrants moving from North Africa into the kind of like into Europe in particular. Now we have this narrative that North Africans are coming in to rape white women, even though for the majority, most of the abuse intercontinentally has come from the UK.
I think
to
you're
Philippines.
Worried. I don't think this has got anything to do with race.
It's not about race, it's just the fact that these narratives that surround themselves around racism have...
If issues are happening and they need to be dealt with, you shouldn't be saying that you can't talk about it because that might cause inter-community issues. You've just got to deal with the issue. Did you listen to Sajid Javid, what he said about grooming gangs just probably a couple of months ago now?
Yep.
He said extremism will flourish if you don't deal with the issues.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's exactly the same as Tommy Robinson is saying.
No,
if you don't deal with the issue, that's when you get extremism.
But the problem is...
And so in policing jokes, this is an example of saying, that's another example of saying, you can't talk about grooming gangs, you can't talk about what migrants do, you can't talk about this, that and the other. And what you're doing is the exact opposite. You're encouraging extremism by trying to shut down talk about issues.
So, with Sajid Javid in particular, he's a paid political politician who, not to be rude, is an Uncle Singh. And
Sorry?
An Uncle Singh is someone who basically parrots the talking points of right-wingers, right? To the detriment of his own people. Uncle Singh.
Uncle Singh?
Yeah.
You refer to like a comparison to Uncle Tom?
Absolutely.
I think you're just out of order to start doing that.
Absolutely. You have your opinion. I don't mind that. But the problem is, Sajid Javid in particular is the same person who went on the national news and said that Muslims are the problem with grooming gangs. People went and did the research.
We need to sort the problems out. We can't just stop
People
talking
went.
about it.
No, that's fair enough. People went and did the
action.
research and found out that majority of grooming gangs still are native British people. So for Sajid Javid to have come out on a national platform to say something that he had not even researched goes against all of the research that he's been presented.
You're doing what you did like months ago. You're conflating two different types of crime.
But the thing is, when you say I'm conflating two different types of crime, I'm conflating two different types of crime because we're ignoring the child abuse that the NSPCC, child abuse charities, and feminists have been talking about for decades. For decades, feminists, child abuse, and the NSPCC have been talking about the fact that young boys, young girls, and women in particular have been abused. When they talk about it, what do we say? Feminism has gone rampantly wild. When Sajid Javid says that Muslims are raping women, that's when we want to listen. That's my biggest problem. I've been talking about child abuse since a young age, just generally as a topic, because I'd like to see it improve. But where I take a problem is when people decide to take an interest because the perpetrators don't look like them. No, that's not how it works. Like you said, we need to address these issues by talking about them.
We're not just talking about it. We need action.
But why is it that we're only talking about them when they're Muslim? That's the question.
Well, that seems to be the only time that we're told we can't talk about them is when.
But you're not talking about
things
them.
are perpetrated by a protected class, whatever it might be, and then all of a sudden we can't talk about it, and then if we're not talking about it, we can't resolve the problem.
But where do you say that you're not allowed to talk about it? Because that's all this park has been talking about.
Yeah, but action has not been happening, so you can't just talk about it. You've got to talk about it to lead to some action.
I agree. So where's the action for child abuse been before the actual grooming gang scandals?
Well, there was a whole lot of action around the Jimmy Savile issue. You know, there was an investigation and there was an inquiry and all sorts of.
But that's a response. That's not action. In the sense that when we talk about
and then there's action. You can see what the government decided to do in response to the type of grooming that was being done with Jimmy Savile, and the police and the local authorities have the people who in charge of like rehabilitation and people in charge of foster care and the police and the local authorities, the whole regime of how they deal with that's all changed.
But then
that's not just talk. I mean, there's real action that's come about.
Not really. Not really. Well, I've spoken to someone who's worked in those industries, and jobs have been cut. Same as our NHS. They are vastly understaffed, and this is leading to even more child abuse.
Yeah, but okay.
So when you say action is being taken, action is not being taken. Be honest.
Well, there are increased obligations for statutory bodies regarding that sort of abuse. It might be that you're right that the number of people that are responsible for that is reduced, but that the responsibilities are still there, and they are new responsibilities that came about following the Jimmy Savile issues.
But these responsibilities clearly, again, have not affected the situation, and the fact that
there are reams of reports of everything that they decided to do after that Jimmy Savile.
But why hasn't it changed anything then?
Well, I'm not sure it hasn't changed anything.
I can tell you it hasn't changed anything because the NSPCC still gets a growing number of accusations and abuse scandals every year. 55,000.
Well, that could be, as you say, austerity funding is being cut. However,
But then you said that action is being taken. How can action be taken if funding is cut?
They're different things. I mean, if they're given different new obligations, but not the resources, I mean that.
So then action isn't being taken. Then we're just putting a band-aid over a bleeding wound.
Well, they're different issues. The authorities have different liabilities now and obligations. And if they're given money, they're not given enough money to do that. Then okay, that's.
But here's the point. Here's the point again.
It's crucial, but it's different.
The point is, this has been going on for decades, right? The underfunding of child services, the underfunding of facilities for rehabilitation of people who have been abused as children or abused just generally, right? That's never reached talking points here or within the British mainstream. It never has. And every time it's been brought up via feminists, via the left wing, it's PC gone mad or it's feminists being triggered, right? And the fact, most people answer with the fact, not yourself in particular, but most people do answer with the idea that feminists should go to the Middle East and see how bad it is there. That's their answer to certain people who bring up child abuse here. So the idea that it's just this sort of branch of Tommy's supporters who can't talk about abuse is completely a farce, because people have been talking about this abuse, but they've been told to shut up.
They've been told to shut up.
I'll give you an example.
I'll give you an example.
One of Sargon's recent tweets, or tweets that he's being exposed for in particular, is the fact that he made the joke that he would not even rape Jess Phillips.
Oh, about 3 years ago, wasn't it?
About 3 years ago, right?
They're bringing it up
Absolutely.
now, yeah. Embarrassing.
Now, he says that it was a joke, and fair enough, if that's his form of humour, I'm not going to police it, that's his form of humour, right? But he's the same person who will tell feminists that their idea of the abuse and rape culture in the West is not as bad as they're portraying. and then he's the same person who then turns around and says that
First person in my family to put
Content over everything from your humanity.
Man, say it straight. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV.
I'm going to try and do this effectively what is science, if you like, and how do we form our views about the world? Because I think that's what's been coming out of this discussion more than the specifics of climate. What is a healthy skepticism? What is a critical attitude? That's what I'd like to try and delve into.